So, hello. This is my stream. Sorry, I was trying to figure something out on OBS. It had my stream up there twice. Anyways, sorry. Hello, welcome. Good afternoon. So, when I was in grad school, I was probably reading close to an academic paper a day. And I've been out of grad school for coming up on a year now. I graduated last May of 2025. And my reading and my writing has slowed down immensely since I graduated. I mean, I've still been reading books. I haven't been really reading essays or papers anymore, and I haven't written fucking a few poems. Maybe I've written a few poems and a few pages on my novel, and that's about it. So I want to get back in the habit of reading and writing academic work, and I thought that doing it on stream would be a good idea. I don't want to really get shoehorned into just being a gaming channel. I have a lot of interests. There's a lot of stuff I would like to talk about. So I guess the idea of only really having an audience that wants to watch my gaming content is one that I want to try and avoid. I want to diversify my content as well as my audience as much as I can. And hopefully that'll lead to cool things, like people being subscribed to my channel for the gaming content and then getting interested in, me talking about books or doing these live streams of reading through academic articles. And maybe, you'll have a vice versa effect. Somebody watched a video on a book I read and then found a game that they become really interested in. And hopefully you get discourse in the comment section and stuff like that. I mean, obviously I don't have the audience base to facilitate, I think, that sort of interaction yet. I mean, I only have 40 subscribers, but someday, who knows? Maybe we'll get all sorts of, interdisciplinary, interfandom, intermedium conversations going on. Anyways, that's just to give some context of why I'm going to be doing this, reading an article online. So I'm not going to be reading it out loud. I'm not doing any sort of audiobook rendition or anything. I will, anytime I will be scrolling through it as I read, so that hopefully you can read along as well. And I'll be giving my thoughts whenever I feel the need to. I'll be making commentary, I should say. So I'll try and keep this up every day. Don't persecute me if I happen to miss a day. But this one, I came across it by looking up. I thought, what would be a good topic for the first time doing this? And I thought maybe, just like a history of science, and origins of science, to get some background, some context of the discipline, why academic articles are written the way they are, why some get published and others don't, something like that. Because I think that academic journals and articles they're not the most accessible thing. I mean, I remember when I was graduating, feeling remorse that I'm not going to have access to the library's database anymore. And maybe I can get some background music going. We'll find a nobody stream. Music to watch grass grow. Okay. Nobody was the go-to channel of mine whenever I was in the library having to do work, usually reading or writing. But yeah, so I pretty much just thought, start with something that's going to give some context of the discipline itself. And so I just went to Google Scholar, which is talking about the accessibility of academic journals and articles. Google Scholar is a good place to start for those who don't have something to like an institutional database. And a lot of the stuff it'll link you to, though, you might not actually be able to read because the websites that publish these articles, host these articles or whatever, require subscriptions to access them, or at least access the whole thing. Sometimes you can read the abstract of something or even like the first few pages, but usually it's the case that it limits you. So I am reading this. The first website I found it on, which was the publisher, I think it was Cambridge. Wasn't able to access it on there. It was wanting me to sign in through my library or institution or have my own, like $200 subscription or whatever. Let's see. So if I wanted to get access, I could purchase the individual article for $30, or I could log in through my institution or my personal account. I don't know how much their subscription actually is. But $30 for an individual purchase of a 20, something page article is pretty steep. And so in a way, there is a, universities are supposed to be the generators of knowledge and ideas and data and so on and so forth. But a lot of the work that they produce as those things gets paywalled. It's gatekept. And so, I don't know, I just think that there would be much more of a benefit, a collective benefit, if this information wasn't made so difficult to access or, paywalled. For some people, $30 probably isn't that big of a deal. To others, it's completely unaffordable. Especially again for an article that's 26 pages. So it's unfortunate, but what I was able to access it on was not Cambridge University Press, cambridge.org. But it was, and how did I find that? It is jstor.org, JSTOR. Definitely used to use this in school. And in school, I probably would have just been able to log into, my library's account and access it from this page too. But JSTOR, you can have a free account, and there are a lot of articles on there that you can read for free online. You can read up to 100 per month for free. If you have access through an institution, or if you have a paid subscription, I think you can download PDFs of these articles. So I have a lot of articles, PDFs already. We might go through some of those that I've downloaded over the years, and some, I never even got to. So I might go through those and pick some out that would be good for reading on the stream. But that's how we're reading this anyways. Couldn't access it on the publisher's website. Could access it for free as one of the 100 per month free online reads on JSTOR.org. So I guess we could just start reading. There we go. Okay. The title of this article is, as you see, Decentering the Big Picture, The Origins of Modern Science and the Modern Origins of Science. Which, this suggests that these are distinct things, perhaps. So science has maybe changed. I wonder why this is capitalized and this isn't. Also, decentering the big picture. They seem to be fans of the big picture. Well, maybe not fans. Acceptors of, slight supporters of, maybe. Thoroughly out of fashion at the moment. Okay. These are the two authors. And here is the asterisk note. So the earliest version of the information in this paper, I guess, was from 1991 for a conference, History of Science conference. Okay, just some acknowledgements and special thanks and things. Okay. I like this quote. So to me, what this quote brings to mind is that the truth of things, like actual reality, is ineffable. It's incomprehensible. It escapes our cognitive categories and our ability to articulate ideas and even to think of them without trying to communicate them. It escapes all that. It escapes reality as it is in itself, which a lot of people like to call God. It's the universal source of all being, the presence at the base of all things, the really real reality, the capital T truth. There's a lot of ways that people say it, and that's the point here, that the truth of it, as I said, escapes all of our ability to comprehend it, to communicate it, to put it into any sort of limit to try and understand. Our understanding, needs boundaries. It needs to box things up and package them and to present them to itself, to you, in a way that is comprehensible. And so we can get hints of it, you know. But the hints that we get, the flashes of insight, are more like direction signs. It's more like it's pointing towards something. Pointing towards something that is everywhere. So there are an infinite ways in which the sign could point. The sign could communicate to you where and what it is you're looking for. But where and what it is you're looking for will always escape the sign and where the sign is directing you. Because it can never be limited by place. It can never be limited by time. It is the eternal everywhere. And it being ineffable doesn't mean we can't talk about it. It being incomprehensible doesn't mean we can't have insight of it. And so that's what this quote reminds me of. What had happened to him was that the ways in which it could be said, which are infinite in number, had become more interesting than the idea that it could not. Even though the capital T truth is ineffable, is incomprehensible, doesn't mean we shouldn't try and say what we think it is. We shouldn't try and make those signs that, you know, attempt to point to it, direct people to it. That's what art is. All of art is somebody's attempt to express the ineffable. That's art, that's religion, that's philosophy. The attempt to express the ineffable. Science as well, you could say. So that's what I get from that quote. I don't know what the author's intention behind it was, but we'll keep moving on. I should probably I've got this full screened here, which means whoops. Which means I did not have chat up. But nobody's watching, so I did not need to have chat up. Why are they something we cannot avoid? Dependence on a big picture. Yeah, so I think even if having a big picture in even like a loose unconscious sense as just like your operational understanding of things, your Weltanschauung. Yeah, I think it's also just as important, even if they're saying, that's, inevitable and we need to acknowledge its inevitability, that people have a Weltanschauung, a worldview, a big picture that they, you know, live their lives in accordance with, or at least, try to. That's just going to be the case, and that we should acknowledge that. I think we also need to acknowledge, I mean, like they said, that grand narratives can be immature, they can be misleading. Like, again, that's what we were talking about here, is that the the truth of the thing is always ineffable. It's always something that cannot be said. And the many ways that we do try and express it, and in a sense we can get it. I mean, great art, like, I feel like it does express a like a particular, an individual instantiation of the truth or perspective on the truth. Good art, I think, really truly is an expression of a perspective on what is really true about reality and human experience and what's beyond human experience. So you have both, you have both sides of it. It's always going to escape that, but attempting to express it is inevitable. And I think it's important to acknowledge both. You can't just try and stick with the expressions, the big picture, the narrative. And you can't just stick with, oh, it'll always escape it. It's ineffable. It's incomprehensible. Like, you got to work with what you have. So it's a both and. And yeah, this is a pretty good first paragraph. I mean, at least, in terms of working with the quote they open with here, their epigram. I forget which is which. But, the students already have a big picture, not collectively. The students individually have a big picture. And that speaks to, the infinity of ways in which an expression of a perspective on the truth can be instantiated. Yeah, okay, so here it is. They think that big pictures are both necessary and desirable. I don't know about that. Like I said, yes, but follow that up with, or introduce it with, one of, like, also mention that they're always going to fall short of the mark. What they're trying to depict, what they are trying to be a picture of, will always escape the depiction. Exactly. This is key, I think. I agree. We need to think explicitly about the overall picture of the history of science which we present and within which we work. The authors did not say which is, like italicized is. Because the picture of history of the history of science, the picture of anything, the general picture of something, the big picture, the depiction, the understanding, the comprehension of blank, it doesn't matter, is exactly something that we present to ourselves. And sometimes we try and present it to others when we communicate these things at conferences and in front of classes and things, or just in our conversations with people. So it's a projection from ourselves. The image is being projected from our understanding and our expression. And we do that because we need to act in the world. We need to have a working model of stuff so that we know how to respond to our ever-changing circumstance. So the overall picture of anything, history of science included, is something definitely that we present to ourselves and to others. And we present that for work, to be operational, to be able to act in the world. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that the picture is in like a capital R reality, capital T truth kind of way. It is a reality. It's a reality of our experience, of our human condition, of our worldview, of of our being in the world. But it's a part of being in the world. It's not a part of reality beyond a living thing, which reality beyond life, I should say, which could still be living. But life as we think of it, like biological life, like an organism. Of course, the source of all life is that which is beyond life. And again, probably is in itself some way living. Or at least it has, I don't know. We'll go back to the paper. Oh wait, where were we at? Oh yeah, within which we work on this principle. Sorry, I got lost in that digression. So okay, so they already feel like they've solved the problem of the existence of big pictures in general. They've they've totally combated postmodernism in the first page. And the difficulty with which our discipline is moving. Oh, okay, we're holding on to it for some reason. Still in print and paperback over 40 years after it's first appeared. Okay, The Origins of Modern Science by who? Herbert Butterfield. What a name. So this copy from 1959, I guess, that they have on Internet Archive is about 250 pages long, I suppose. Oh, that goes into the index. So the actual book itself is the introduction written by the author. Oh. Yes. Okay, so we'll include that, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. And then from 1 to 239. Yeah, so like 245 pages about. The conservatism of Copernicus. Downfall of Aristotle and Ptolemy. Oh, that's suggestions for further reading. Which is cool. 4 pages of suggestions for further reading. Wow. So yeah, this was from a new edition from 1957, and it was a third printing of it. I don't know if there have been any changes to it since 1957, but yeah, it might be interesting. Let's go back to our article. These guys seem to think it's outdated, perhaps. See, I think this is not a good move. The mechanization of the world picture, the construction of modern science, mechanism, and mechanics, that is definitely a big picture we need to move away from. The mechanistic one. Oh. I see. I see their distinction they made in their own title now. Well, of course, a history of science course is going to cover it. I mean, why wouldn't it? The weird part is students of the arts, needing to be familiar with it. Not saying they shouldn't be familiar with it, but like it being necessary. But of course, it's going to be in a history of science course. It being the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Yeah, this is an unfortunate part. It being the only piece of our discipline which has any currency in the general intellectual world. I don't know if that's actually true. I don't. Yeah. I mean, maybe it is. I can't speak for the general intellectual world, but that is unfortunate if that is true. So back to what I think they're saying here. So the origins of modern science would be the scientific revolution of the 17th century that they mentioned, down here or whatever. With like, with like why can't I think of his name? The Sir Isaac Newton and Rene Descartes and the modern origins of science is the book that Butterfield wrote and the like. Like all of these books right here would be the modern origins of science. And the scientific revolution with, Descartes and Newton and Copernicus and so on and the like, that would be the origins of modern science. So that's the distinction they're making here. Scientific revolution, 17th century. Modern histories of science, such as, Butterfield and colleagues. Okay. Oh, gosh. Sorry, I heard my cats fighting. They really want to be in here. Oh, come here, Goosey. This is Goosey. I just realized I never focused this camera on me. I'll be right back. Cats are crazy. I want to go get one of these cookies, though. These things are really good. They're somehow like both like more baked golden brown and also softer than a Chips Ahoy is. Like it's both more cooked and still softer than a Chips Ahoy. Very, very good cookie. I don't know what the name of them is. We got them at H Mart, but Interesting. Ooh, this looks cool. From the closed world to the infinite universe. Whitehead, pretty cool. I would read that. I like Whitehead. Okay. So he's saying that this was funny. He's saying that the big picture that Butterfield and colleagues were trying to promote or to depict in their books has gone through a lot of criticism and challenge recently, and they're going to go over some of those reasons why it's been under attack, or it's at least been under criticism. Oh, I just kicked my Switch. I probably shouldn't keep it on the ground under my desk. That's not a good spot for a Switch. High chance of being kicked in that spot. But I can hear my cats just wrestling out there. I need to go refill my coffee soon. Even though it's been under heavy criticism as of late, he's not saying that these authors or thinkers, historians, were idiots. He uses the word. I don't know if I've ever read the word idiot in an academic paper. That's so funny. He's not saying they're dumb. He's just saying that they were working in their own time, and that they were biased. They were trying to promote a picture that they wanted to promote based on certain assumptions they had about science itself. And I think this is an important point for all of history, right? History is a perspective on the past. Just like every truth that we have access to is bound to a perspective, meaning that it's biased in some sense. Every truth we have is bound to a perspective. Which is why all of the truths that we work with are just expressions of the capital T universal timeless truth. And so it never gets all of it, it never expresses all of it with perfect accuracy. And so history also, the truths of history are from a perspective. They're from the perspective of the present, and the present is always changing. So to say that previous historians were wrong and that we're right, maybe sometimes that's more so the case, but most of the time, what's really the case is that circumstances have changed. The present now is not the present that it was then. And history, the truths of history being from the perspective of the present, they're going to change. They're going to be contingent on what the present moment is, the circumstances of the present. And so I think this is a good point to make here. So yeah, they're just tossing out. They just want to toss it all out and say that we're not making the same assumptions that they did about the nature of science. We're going to try and establish and build a new big picture. So we're throwing out the old big picture and everything that went with it, including the idea of the scientific revolution, which I think is good. I wonder if they're going to talk about in terms of like the criticisms and challenges that the scientific revolution has gone through, how Sir Isaac Newton was into things like alchemy and the occult. Oh, I had a viewer. Thanks for popping in. Thank you, thank you. Dang, you know what? Hmm. So the music's going to be a bit louder now, I think, because let's see, is it still playing? Yeah. Anyways, let's get back to the article. Yeah, you'll probably be able to hear the music a bit better now. Hopefully it's not a problem like maybe I should put my headphones on. I don't know if that's worth it. Yes, this is good. A pluralist big picture of science, meaning that there are many possible ways of knowing and studying the world. That's great. Yes, a particular way currently dominant in our culture. Great thing to acknowledge, yes. Oh, yeah, this is a great point, too. That he was saying with that book by Butterfield, he took a grand sweep of all human history, from, prehistory up to the Human Genome Project. I mean, not really, because he wrote that in like the 40s, but up until the current, science of his day, they mentioned the Human Genome Project because this was in the 90s, I guess, or early 2000s. A grand sweep, all leading up to science. It's all the history of science, as if science was the only way of knowing and interacting with the world. And now they're saying that whole big sweep would have to be just the history of ways of knowing the world, as opposed to history of science. It's the history of ways of knowing the world, science being one of those, but a lot of other things being on there, like mythological or, philosophical or so on and so forth. Intuitional, emotional. Excuse me. Historical, even. History isn't science. So, anyways, I think that's a good point. Science does not have the exclusive, claim to or authority of like knowing and interacting with the world. Yes. The scientific revolution, the origins of modern science, is not a transition, as they say. It's not a progression, a development of older forms of science, like medieval science or ancient science. No, it's a whole new thing. It's a whole new way of investigating the world and of trying to come to understanding. And so it's an invention. It's not a development or progression or transition. Okay. So they're putting the scientific revolution a bit later. My bad. I shouldn't use that term. They're putting the invention of science, of modern science, or let's just say science, modern, just because, anyways, they're putting the invention of science a bit later than the scientific revolution would have. So they're saying that you can't just, or at least they don't want to just say, okay, we're not talking about a, further development of science from earlier ways of doing science, maybe more primitive than how we do it now, but still, science, let's call it. It's like the invention of science, like you were saying, but we're still going to write out the birth certificate as happening with the scientific revolution. They would rather put it 1 to 200 years later, I guess. We'll see why. Okay, so they say that they are aware of similarities between some of the ideas that they're inciting here with stuff that's already been said in postmodern literature, but they're not like directly interacting with that postmodern literature, and they're not using the postmodernist language because they just don't want to complicate things. They think that their audience, is going to be able to get the idea better if they use plain language and not so much the jargon of the postmodernist literature, even though there are similarities they're acknowledging. And for further reading on how this conversation crosses over in postmodernism, they're recommending these two books here. I would say look to Joseph Campbell. If you want to answer this question, how should we deal with the remainder of the picture? Read Joseph Campbell's series of books, The Masks of God, and he'll give you the he'll give you the rest of the picture. Don't worry. Yes, the scientific understanding is a contingent one. It was not a necessary development. Okay, so decentering, term used in their title, they're decentering the big picture by science isn't the focus. It's not the thread that runs all the way through. Science is a contingent section, the most recent one of this big picture, but it's not the running thread. Yeah, so this third one, which points toward a subject completely different from the history of science, I think is, again, what I was saying Joseph Campbell provides in his 4-volume work, The Masks of God. Let's check chat. Has anybody joined in? No. Okay, so next section, the origins of modern science. Okay, yeah, so know where you come from. Know your history, know your roots. So the history, he's saying at this time, when Butterfield was first developing his ideas that, became the origins of modern science, the book, that the history of science, a big motivation of it was to essentially promote science itself, was to, speak on the importance of science and the nature of science and how it's, this development of all previous human knowledge. I might go get some cereal. So now we're going to look to that particular view of science, that particular conception of science that they were trying to promote with their versions of the history of science. And we're going to do that so that we can then better understand the scientific revolution. Yeah, I'm going to refill my coffee and get some cereal. Sorry, I was choking on the cereal. I'm back now, though. Let's keep reading. So he's saying that we're going to go over 3 ways. I'm back. Collagen. So I want to go get this too. Language, Truth, and Logic. By Ayer, Alfred Jules Ayer. This is like if you want to get into logical positivism, I guess. This is what it says on the back, at least. This is quintessential logical positivism book, but it says this is the first full-length presentation in English of the logical positivism of Carnap, Neurath, and others. Has gone through many printings to become a classic of thought and communication. Pretty much, the idea is that I had a bookmark in there from Maine. All right, Goose. Oh, here's the big boy. Hey, buddy. So, pretty much the idea with logical positivism is that the only truthful statements are ones that can Goosey. Oh man, I'd prefer it if you didn't do that, buddy. I was attacking the string lights I have up. Hey, Marky. Mark's in here now, too. Both the kitties hanging out. The idea with logical positivism is that the only, and it's been a while since I've read that book, so I'm trying to, and people like, Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein, they, sort of came out of the logical positivist tradition. Wittgenstein's like, everything that can be said clearly and distinctly. Is sort of the idea behind logical positivism, that the only statements that carry any truth value are ones that these cats are going crazy. Are ones that essentially can be like put in logical formulation. Can become a well-formed formula. Hey, buddy. Hey, Goosey. Oh, and he's sitting right on top of my computer, which is where the water cooler is. I don't know why he can't just be satisfied sitting in my lap. There you go, Goosey. Good boy. Now he's sitting in my lap, but it probably won't last long. And now Mork's on top of my computer. Oh, Mork. Oh no, my camera just died or something. Shit. Yeah, I think it died. Well, who needs it? Alright, I'm just gonna let the cats be. Sorry you didn't get to see Mark, people. That's something that's really special. Oh, my bad. It's not that it can be put into a well-formed logical formula, but that they can be scientifically verifiable, which means that you have to be able to go out and observe them, to test them empirically. Okay, so well, it could be either, I guess, according to this AI overview. A statement can be meaningful, i.e., carry truth value, if it is either empirically verifiable, that's a like scientifically verifiable one, you can observably test it in the world, or if it's tautology or like analytically meaningful, which that side of it would be like being put in a well-formed logical formula. So one or the other, I guess. Okay. So that's one way. The scientifically verifiable, logically well-formed is how you get to truth value or meaningfulness. That's one characterization of the nature of science that was popular then. And a second one is a moral one, which is to tie it to, the good of like freedom, rationality, truth, the motor of social and material progress. So the thing driving society and civilization towards higher levels of progress and advancement and understanding and freedom. The main thing is the cats, they try and like climb everywhere and chew on cables and stuff and knock controllers over. Because there's so many, like, cords and things in here that they can get caught on and pull shit down and chew on, and just little menaces. Are you a little menace, Goosey? Hey, buddy. Good boy. All right. Yeah, so they saw like scientific knowledge is tied to social progression. Like we're only able to be manipulated by, you know, our so-called leaders if we don't have the rational toolkit of science to defend against their rhetorical manipulation. Hey, gosh, Mork's being good. Mork's just sitting on the desk over there, looking out the window. Goose is climbing on everything, everyone, knocking controllers over, making me kick stuff on the ground. I'm just kidding, that was my own fault. But I went to go move something away from him and I kicked my PS2 down here. Now he's eating cords. Goose, what is up, dude? Okay, so here's the third way then. Ow! He bit me. Yeah, this one's the lie of, oh, AI will free up your time, you know, next year you get fired because AI is doing your job. That's the lie of this promise right here. That we're all going to be doing nothing because, you know, the machines take care of it for us. Yeah, right. The people who own and sell and control the machines are the ones that are going to live the lives of leisure while everyone else is going to live the lives of poverty. Yeah, and so the third characterization of science popular at the time of Butterfield of the developments of the modern origins of science was that it was just a universal human enterprise, that it was just a natural way that humans probed the world and asked questions and investigated things and so on. I think we need more of the ancient ways of thinking to save ourselves, honestly. Hey, why are you guys fighting? Just look out the window and be happy. Hey, stop it. Stop it, Mark. Stop it, Goose. They were fighting because Goose was trying to walk past Mork on the windowsill, and they were just beating each other up. Oh, I'd like to see that movie. Things to Come, the 1936 film. That sounds good. Propagandists for science. That's a funny way to put it. Yeah, we need the arts-based concept of humanity and humanism back. Cut it out, Goose. Goosey, come here, buddy. You guys need to get kicked out again. If it was just Mork in here, that'd be fine. But Goose, you are just too much. Goosey, there you are. Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, science was attached to these three big moments: the Copernican revolution, the Galilean revolution, and the Newtonian synthesis of those two revolutions, which involved a mathematization and mechanization of the world picture. Everything became mechanism and representational by math. Interestingly enough, if you've seen the Bannon interview of Epstein that was recently released, Epstein, I think rightfully makes the claim that we need to move past this as a paradigm, the idea that everything can be conceived in terms of math, that's not true, that we need to recognize that there are limitations of science and the reach of mathematics to model and conceive of the universe. We need to find other ways of doing this. art, intuition, philosophy. And so, but the writers of the history of science made claim to these three moments, and they set those moments in conflict against ancient ways of thinking by pairing up Copernicus with Ptolemy, Galileo with Aristotle, and the church, and Harvey's rejection of Galen. And then they attached those philosophical positions that everything is conceivable and modelable in mathematics, and that the world is mechanism, and their conflict with ancient ways of thinking and understanding. They then tied those to positive values such as freedom and social progress, and civilization, conveniences of civilization, and so on. Yeah, and the application of science to industry. Oh man, I see some of the major problems in the world being tied to centralization of power, and the marriage of science and industry greatly amplified the ability for those who already controlled the systems of centralized power to siphon more power into their centralized systems, I think. Just identifying science with human thought in general, or the logos or rationale in general, is, inaccurate. The identification of science with human thought. The history of science was the history of human evolution. Crazy thing to say. Power over nature is a fool's pursuit, and a miserable fool at that. You only ever have power over yourself. It's important to understand. It's the wisdom of the Stoics. And then, they tried to appropriate all other forms of investigation and understanding as just other forms of science. Which gave them a continuity all the way back to the beginnings of humanity. That science, science as we have it now is, the the crowning jewel of all of human progress and history. Where again, there, the big picture they're going to try and develop or build, establish, whatever, is one that sees these as all like distinct ways of knowing an investigation. Yep, this is true. And that, that's the mistake of behaviorism. Behaviorism fell to the wayside, rightfully so, because, ultimately, the behavior of animals is not something that is mechanical or able to be mathematized in any real sense. I think a much better understanding of behavior you can find in Merleau-Ponty's structure of behavior. The behaviorists, clearly got it wrong. And you can look at, Chomsky's debate with Skinner about language acquisition. It's clear the behaviorists were misguided in their initial assumptions about how the action of agents can be studied and understood. And that, might be something that he's hinting to here. Although life sciences, he might be more talking about biology than psychology. But yeah, circulation of blood. I think this is a poor understanding of Aristotle's concept of the final cause. An extraordinarily leisurely revolution. Yeah, spirits and powers, baby. Yeah, this is what I was talking about. Like Newton, for example, was also heavily into the occult and into alchemy. Excuse me. Dang, where are all the viewers at, Okay, where are we? Yeah, I mean, just because they produced them doesn't mean that they weren't in conflict. I'm not saying they were in conflict, but I don't know. I don't know if this paragraph is making that strong of a point, to be honest. I mean, I see what they're saying, like, the idea of like Galileo as this lone hero figure fighting, the institution of the church, just by, being a free thinker, a rebel, and not giving in to the status quo or the authorized truth, which, I mean, those things were true, but that idea, is also a little misleading in the sense that it was only out of those contexts of institutions and values and theology and previous understanding, and it all, as opposed to just being an anomaly that independently arose and fought against the status quo of the time, it itself could only have come from the circumstance. But that doesn't mean that it still wasn't in discordance with it. Yeah, this is what I was talking about before. Yeah, this is a good point. You can't just appropriate moments in the past and say that they were parts of this chain leading up to, what you see as now. You can't just adopt it to fit into your narrative. They did not see themselves as early scientists, the way that current scientists want to view them as. Okay, I am going to see how many pages this actually goes, because this is taking longer than I thought because I keep stopping to talk forever. Damn. I was hoping they'd have, like 11, 12 pages of references, but they don't have any pages of references. This goes straight to the end. Okay. Yeah, we're either gonna have to pick this up quite a bit, or I'm gonna have to stop and, we'll start again and finish it later. But let's see how much we can get through. So this paragraph is bringing to question the unity of science in its methodology and in its collection of knowledge, I guess. Yeah, power and control. That's what I was just saying. This is true. This, I don't know about this. Yeah, I don't. Well, actually, I don't know about any of this. I think that there is knowledge free of all of that. I think it's rare nowadays. I think it used to be more common before, but yep, it's true. Yeah, I think both of these two paragraphs make important points. This is interesting. This is saying like the idea of the monotheorist idea that, you know, you can have a general theory of everything, and that comes from the unified methodologies of science, is a continuation of a long tradition of monotheist beliefs, which both are incorrect, in my opinion. But you know, these guys want to see themselves, the monotheorists want to see themselves as so distinct and more advanced than the monotheists, but they're both making the same folly. Yes. It's not the one only true way of knowing the world, but it's just one of many possible ways of knowing the world. Science, that is. So he's saying that the concept of the scientific revolution was attacked by feminists and environmentalists, and it was changed from being seen as a good thing to being seen as a negative thing. And in response to that, people have tried to add to it. They've tried to add to it perspectives of religion, politics, and economics, and that all this adding to it in response to its critiques has made it incoherent as a concept anymore. So he's saying that, yeah, the scientific revolution, these attempts to rewrite it, to add to its conception, to make it fit with more modern perspectives and to address its critiques are more or less wastes of effort, and instead of being rewritten, the scientific revolution needs to be axed, written off, edited out. We need to find something else. We don't just need to modify that idea. We need to just bring in a new idea. So what kind of big picture are we going to make to replace the old one if we're just throwing the old one out? And he's saying maybe instead of being understood as a scientific revolution, it's, the development of a new philosophy. Which is true. I mean, I've said for a long time, and I've had professors and other people whatnot disagree with me, but I mean, science is a philosophy. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. So they still would like to, like Butterfield and colleagues, they would still like to explore the origins of science, but they would like to do so in the sense of finding the start of something distinct, and not just the further development of something that existed in more primitive forms or whatever before. So they're saying that in their investigation of the origins of science in the revised sense, and so far as they're looking for the practice of something new, the emergence of something distinct from other ways of investigation and knowing, they are looking for that in this period between 1760 and 1848, and instead of the earlier 17th century positioning of the scientific revolution. I mean, it is a modern myth. Science is a modern myth for sure. Yeah, this is bad. Joseph Campbell also talks about this in the Masks of God series. That, I mean, we live in the wasteland. That's what is it? Is it Eliot or Whitman that writes The Wasteland? But the modern world is the wasteland because it has been secularized. It has been despiritualized, and that's what Nietzsche was warning against when he talked about the death of God. He wasn't proclaiming that, God was dead and I killed him with philosophy or something like that. He was saying that God was dying in society, in culture, because of this despiritualization that was happening with the turn towards mechanism and mathematics and, detached observation and stuff like that. And it was more of a warning. And that God was going to need to be replaced with something else, and it became replaced with power and money. I mean, money is power. It became replaced with power over nature through knowledge, through scientific knowledge, power over others through technology, as well as power over nature through technology. And power over others is not what Nietzsche was about either. Like, people think Nietzsche was all about individualism and, going against the grain and stuff like that, which in a sense, it's complicated because the dragon of Thou Shalt was slain by the hero that possesses the will to power. But that isn't the ultimate position of transcendence. The hero who slays the dragon of Thou Shalt with his individual will to power. One needs to look further to the child. For an example of one with true transcendent significance. The child being one who is not dominated by the instructions of thou shalt or the illusions of the will to power, but as one who is content. Both those mesmerized by the thou shalt and the will to power are caught up in the turning of the spoked wheel. They're caught up in samsara. The child is the one who has found the still point in the center, nirvana. Anyways. And so they're going to go over their principles of science as they construct their own big picture. Yes, the ideology of science needs to be explained, not taken for granted. Yes, its values, its system of values. Yeah, because I mean, back to this paragraph. This is a good paragraph. This makes a good point. That science makes assumptions, but they usually, in its practices and ways of analyzing its data and developing its knowledge and so on and so forth, they definitely come with some heavy assumptions, but they usually take those for granted. They don't critically analyze them, and a lot of times they don't even acknowledge that they are assumptions, but that they come from, some sort of timeless logic or something. So I think this is a good paragraph. Makes a good point. Yes, actors categories. So this is going to address behaviorism, I guess. Oh, okay, never mind. That's not what I thought it was going to be about. Must be a different Skinner. Yeah, never mind. Different Skinner. I mean, when they said actors and Skinner, I thought they were going into behaviorism, but so what they're saying here is that, like, what the point that they were making, that like Greek philosophers weren't doing a primitive form of science, but they were masterfully doing Greek philosophy, and respecting like actors within their context and circumstance. That we don't need to appropriate them to fit like our narrative or our modern understanding, but they could have been doing something totally different with motivations we'll never understand, than what we may assume them to be doing. And so respecting the actors within their own context and situation, and whatnot, and without trying to adopt it into the way we see it now. All right, we're getting through it. We're getting through it. Okay, so that the fourth principle is kind of similar to the third principle, I think. Whoops. So yeah, if they say God, they probably mean God, and their enterprise in talking about these things might be different than, how we might assume initially. And so we need to recognize that their conclusions and statements and things were coming out of specific motivations of inquiry and general enterprises and stuff, projects that we need to still consider. We can't just take their conclusions and statements out of context of their motivations for seeking those conclusions and statements. And then also that, again, like if they say God or soul or something like that, we need to think about what that would have meant for them to use that word, and not just say like, oh, well, by God, they must mean nature. And we have our understanding of the natural world as being mechanistic, It's interesting talking about the change in the word science and what it means and when it, became used as what we currently mean by it. This footnote here talks about that. And then also this part here talking about, theology used to be regarded as the queen of sciences, the epitome of science. And now it's not even considered a science at all. And that the current use of the word science began sometime in the 19th century. Or no, 18th century, my bad. Or no. Yes, 19th century. Yeah, so again, going to the point that people who we may consider now retrospectively to have been scientists, but at the time were referred to as natural philosophers, we need to respect maybe the differences in those terms and what natural philosophy may have meant to those people at the time, and not just try to turn it into, just a different meaning of scientist. And if you want, the translation of this is more or less right here. That, and this is making the point that on the difference of what natural philosophy was to science, or what the natural philosopher did versus the scientist, was that the natural philosopher took as an assumption into their inquiry that nature was an expression of God's powers and purposes, and being able to understand nature through its inquiry, yes, sometimes experimental, was to understand God. It was through the experimental nature of natural philosophy to pull insight of God from the phenomenon that you can experiment on. Ah, natural science. Yeah, see, this would have been philosophy, but somebody changed it to science in a translation or whatever. Wait, where is that? I think I'm at the beginning here. So maybe the period that they picked as the emergence of science was in part because of the use of the word science as we use it now, beginning around the turn of the 19th century. Yeah, this was a mistake. I think De Anima is one of the best biological texts. And they're saying in this period as well, you have all these changes in things like, conversations of the soul leaving biology, conversations of God leaving physics and stuff like that. Nature as created by God, that idea became unscientific. The idea of soul being the life force of animals became unscientific. And this is just to further show the real difference between natural philosophy and science, and that the real emergence of science happened later on than what was before called the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Because at that point they were doing natural philosophy. So this is talking also about how at this period there was a shift to doing science as a profession as opposed to as a passion, or as an amateur you were a paid professional. And also science started being done in laboratories, which I think is an important shift. The laboratory was made the final arbiter in truth about nature, which is ironic, because nature is not I mean, nature is in the library because nature is everywhere, but nature as conceived of in the laboratory, as replicated in the laboratory, is not nature as it is at large or in the wild, you know. So along with, so they were talking about how science became like a state project, a state funded project. And you know, along with the creation of those secular institutions that funded and housed science and the scientists, came along with a secularizing of the discipline. Okay, so here's their definition of science. So let's just read it. Science was the new collective name of the new secular disciplines for studying the natural world as a secular object, for the discovery of abstract regularities in nature, and for the exploitation of natural resources, for acquiring knowledge in a secular sense, and for material and social improvement. Wow, I think that's a good definition. And I think that that makes the key points of how science is not natural philosophy. And Laplace even made that distinction when he was saying that he took God out of Newton's universe. Newton was a natural philosopher. He was not studying the natural world as a secular object, but he was studying the natural world as a divine creation, one that as a divine creation held within it expressions of divinity, or held within it knowledge of divinity, whatever. Divinity itself, maybe even. And so, yeah, I think that's a good definition. And here, they're trying to discover abstract regularities in nature. All scientific claims are statistical. They're all statistical, which means that there is always room for doubt because they're just looking for regularities. They're looking for patterns, which means statistical. And you can never get 100% in statistics. I mean something specific by that. That, it's like you can never really say that all swans are white, because even if you go around and you record all the swans that you come across, you travel the whole world and you record all the swans you encounter as being white, there's still always the possibility of there being a black swan out there. That's what I mean. So even if you're within your population studied or observed or whatever, you have 100%, that doesn't mean you really have 100%. Because there's always the possibility that you missed the one that would break the mold in the population that you studied, As in, you didn't study the black swan. You overlooked it. Okay. Oh yeah. So that's that. And then the exploitation of natural resources. Because the natural world is seen as a secular object, it is seen as devoid of life. It is seen as devoid of divine significance. And so we can view it as a storehouse of resources that are there waiting for us to exploit for our own purposes and devices and whatnot. When we see the world as perhaps Newton did, as the natural philosopher did, as being endowed with divinity, as a creation of divinity, then it's more likely we see it as living, as having significance within itself, as harboring its own individual, unique telos. And so it's no longer a store of resources waiting for exploitation, but it itself has its intrinsic value and significance. I would say there's probably a better definition for secularization than this. I don't think it's about religious thinking. And the authors here are saying that the crucial word here is social, meaning that people can still individually have religious thinking or values, but that they no longer have their social significance, meaning that the institutions, for example, practicing science, are not concerned with the religious thinking. But I think secularization could be better defined as something like the process in which a enchanted world, a inherent divinity in the world, loses its social significance or even recognition. Like Don Quixote. That's secularization. Don Quixote himself isn't. Don Quixote is the last, bastion holding out against secularization. He still lives in an enchanted world, but the world around him has been secularized. It has lost its enchantment. Okay. Although in 18th century England, So he's going over here now. So he's saying that the Age of Revolutions, which is the period that they propose as being where we find science emerge in its like true and current form. England lagged behind a little bit from the rest of continental Europe. And those revolutions in the Age of Revolutions were the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, and the post-Kantian Intellectual Revolution. This new middle class that was consolidated, wielding the political power, the industrial power, and the intellectual power, is now dissolving. There has been a siphoning of power going on to take away the control this middle class had that emerged out of the Age of Revolutions and to appropriate that power into the hands of the elite. That's been happening in our lifetimes, for sure, and is still happening today. And to prove that, I'll just show something real quick. Let's see. Ownership. Let's see, where's my percent button? I have a fucking Lord of the Rings keyboard and I get the top 1% versus... Okay. Here you go. You can see how the middle class wealth in 1990 far outweighed that of the top 1%. And how throughout the past few decades, we have seen a shift in the balance of power to where the middle class is dissolving and that power is being siphoned to the top 1%. And now currently they control more than the majority of families. Also, you've seen a change in CEO pay. We've seen a change in CEO pay. About 50 years ago, the average CEO pay was about 20 times that of the national average pay. Nowadays, it is 300 to 400 times that of the national average. This is important to pay attention to. It's happening right before our eyes. You can see it again here. Anyways, let's get back to this. So he's saying that actually in the Age of Revolutions, we started seeing the stories that influenced Butterfield's sort of big picture history of science. Um, the story about science started being told in the Age of Revolutions, which is what the authors here are saying is the start of science, which makes sense. Um, So he's putting the Age of Revolutions, as which again is about from 1760 to 1840, about as both as the um, historical emergence of both things mentioned in the title, which are the origins of modern science and modern origins of science. They both come from the period between 1716 and 1843, according to these authors. What is he talking about here? Oh, right, yeah. So we're saying the Edge of Revolutions, we see pretty much every feature that's essential and definitional to science, which are its name as science, as opposed to natural philosophy or something like that. Its aim as being a secular investigation into a secular world, and its values, and these come from the emergence of the middle class and the values that they were pursuing, which were liberal values of free inquiry, meritocratic, or meritocratic expert government, and material progress. which again, coming from the revolution in thought, the revolution in politics, and the revolution in industry. And how even the story of science started being formed there as well. All right, we're almost there. We're getting close. And again, it's not about science suddenly being done right or done better or like a further development of science happening in this age of revolutions. It's a new thing that emerges here. So he's not doing it's not arguing for what like Butterfield was. He's not just taking Butterfield's story and pushing it a little more into the present. This is a new picture being formed, one that sees science as one unique way of inquiry and understanding, among others. So they're saying that this guy, Arnold Thackeray, was close to, in 1974, was close to saying what they were saying. This is funny right here. Footnote 57. So they're not looking for the modern version of science, but that science can only be modern because it is a modern enterprise and a result of our modern culture. It is not, the most recent iteration of science. Let's see. We got any chats or anything in here? Nope. Okay. So I think this is probably the last section here. This is a good quote. This is a good quote. Science will only appear as the native knowledge form of our own culture, not in a central or special place that is universally, threading through all of human history. And so I think this is important, this distinction between evolution as popularly understood versus the neo-Darwinian way, meaning that evolution is contingent. The paths of evolution are contingent. They are not necessary. The dinosaurs reigned on Earth dominant for hundreds of millions of years, and it was a contingent event, an asteroid colliding with the Earth, that caused their reign to come to an end and the reign of mammals to begin. There's a book by Gould that goes into that, the precariousness of the precariousness and contingency of and capriciousness of the paths of evolution. And they're using this word decentering, adopting it from the psychologists Piaget and Mead, and which in that sense was used to talk about how children become to develop a theory of mind and see that existence is not centered on them as their experience suggests, but that other people have their own centers of experience. Centers are all relative. Oh yeah, here it is. Stephen Jay Gould, Wonderful Life, The Burgess Shale and the Nature of History. That's the book I was talking about. I don't know if evolution has to be. Well, never mind. I won't go there. And so they're saying a decentering has already happened in the history of religion, taking the center off of Christianity. So a decentering, a similar decentering, they're trying to make take place in the history of knowledge, centering it away from science. Again, I think for this decentering to really take place, we need to call it the history of knowledge instead of the history of science. Or the history of ideas or something. Yeah, so they're saying that Christianity's attempt to make Judaism into just an earlier stage in its own development is similar to how science tried to make natural philosophy just an earlier stage in its own development, which are both inaccurate in either case. So this is interesting. The concept of religions as contraposed ideological communities is a modern invention which the West, during the last 200 years or so, has exported to the rest of the world. Very interesting. I wonder what the implications of that have been. Probably quite negative. In here saying that Greek philosophy, medieval natural philosophy, so on, all the other ways of forming ideas and gathering knowledge and inquiring about ourselves and the world around us should be studied independently and not just as earlier stages in the development of science. Yeah, this is important. This is important. And they make this distinction because different maps of the globe, can change the relative size of countries. So let's look at the Peters projection, for instance. Whoops. So we'll look at the Mercator projection versus the Peters projection. And you see how in the Mercator projection, Africa and South America look much smaller, while Europe and North America look much larger than how they seem over here in the Peters projection. So this is showing a more accurate relative size of landmass. So they make that distinction because they're saying that the scientific way of knowing things is limited to like here and here. That's not most of the landmass, but if you were to say that and look at this map, it seems like a much larger portion. Okay. And I mean, I would say even more than that, intuitional knowledge too. Mystical knowledge, emotional knowledge. Yep. Definitely. Yeah, so here you go. They're saying the same thing we were just looking at. And they're saying that even so, up here they were talking about how Western science, even though it comes from, as we saw in the comparison of maps, a relatively small area of the globe, it spread to many areas of the globe because of the nations who practiced science became globe faring and colonizing and whatnot with their big navies. And but questioning how, true to form those versions of science were as they were spread. Like, was the formation of science in Japan really that similar to how science was formed and practiced in Europe? I don't know. But this is bringing that to question. All right, this is it. Last page. Hell yeah. Exactly. We need to expand beyond the positivists to talk about other types of knowledge. We cannot be limited to the knowledge that is empirically verifiable or logically sound. Yeah, it's good. You should never apologize for raising questions, even if you don't have answers. Very good. That was a great paper. I really like that. I think that they did a good job of doing what I mentioned at the beginning, which is that we both have to acknowledge that we're always going to have a big picture that we operate in or with, but we also need to acknowledge how those are constantly being updated because our situation is constantly being updated, and how they are never going to capture like the true nature of the thing they're trying to depict. And I think they did a really good job of pointing out the problems with the big picture of science that has been dominating the zeitgeist for decades, as they say, the middle of the 20th century, and pointing out the flaws with that big picture. And I think they did a good job of trying to construct their own by addressing the flaws that they see in the one dominant since, the 1950s. 40s, 50s, whatever. That was a great paper. I'm not going to say too much because, I've been streaming for 3 hours at this point, and I've been talking a lot throughout the whole thing, So if you, if you want to know my thoughts on this, watch the whole 3 hour stream, I guess. But I really enjoyed that paper. I enjoyed reading it. I agree with a lot of the stuff they said. It was very interesting and insightful, I would say. So yeah, Andrew Cunningham, Perry Williams, you guys did a good job. This has been my commentary on Decentering the Big Picture, The Origins of Modern Science, and the Modern Origins of Science by Andrew Cunningham and Perry Williams. Thanks for joining me on this. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.